Many founders think fundraising is about pitching, but the reality is that most are not ready for fundraising yet. Don't get caught up in play acting at fundraising. Get obsessed with the pitch, the beautiful deck, the polished presentation. The reality is 99% of your success or failure happens before you create that first slide. So today, let's take a dive in on exactly what matters to investors at the end of the day. Welcome to Feel the Boot, the science of startups. I'm your host, Lance Cottrell, and I'm here to help you navigate that nearly vertical learning curve you're going to encounter as you build your business. I know what it's like. I've been there myself, and I've helped thousands of founders like you along their journeys. This episode is part of our playlist on fundraising, and I put a link up there. I encourage you to check out the rest of the videos. If you're trying to get your hands around where you are in the process and whether you're ready to raise, I created a fundraising readiness scorecard as part of my fundraising toolkit. It's the same checklist that I use when evaluating companies at the North Bay Angels. You can get it and all the other tools at feeltheboot.com/raise. The problem comes when founders prioritize form over substance. They spend their time making beautiful decks, attractive slides, and perfecting the exact words that they want to say, rather than making sure that their business is fundamentally sound and makes sense. Now, investors typically look at 4 different filters when they're analyzing companies. They're looking at the math, the evidence, the moat, and the machine that you've built. And we're going to talk about all 4 of them and what you need to do to make sure you cross those filters. First, let's talk about investor math. The reality is most great businesses are not venture-investable. Venture investors have very specific needs. We're looking for returns on our investment. I need to believe that you have the ability to return 20, 50, 100 times my investment within 10 years for you to be something that I can realistically invest in. Your mission, your purpose, the greater good that you do in the world, those are all fine and they may weigh into my decisions. But if the core economics aren't there, I can't write that check. One of the first things I look at is timing. The math never works out unless you're at the right moment. Lots of great companies get started at the wrong time and go nowhere. They're either too early, the market isn't ready, or they're too late, and they're passed over by many other competitors who got there and grabbed market share before they had a chance to start. So we really care about where you are in that process. Are you building something right on the leading edge of some new wave? This is the question, why now? What is the big trend or change that's taking place that makes it possible for you to be building this business? Is there some new technology that's involved, some change in behaviors, some economic shift, some new kinds of businesses or markets that have evolved that you're jumping in on? You want to be someone at the front edge of that, not a me too. By the time it's on everyone's lips, there are tons of companies that are already there. Speaking of tons of companies being already there, if you're saying there aren't any competitors, that's probably a huge problem. I'm really going to question, is this actually an interesting space to be in if no one else is going after it? That suggests that it's less interesting than you think it is. But in fact, the reality that I usually see is that there are lots of companies that have tried to do this thing in the past and they're not around anymore. That's why you're not seeing them, right? The bodies may not be easy to find, but they're out there. You need to be looking and seeing where all those bodies are on the side of the road and start thinking like a CSI forensics technician. Locate those bodies, dig them up, and understand why they died. What happened to these companies to cause them to fail at the exact same thing you're trying to do, and make darn sure that you have some approach, some aspect of your business model that avoids those failure points. I don't want to invest in you to see you die of starvation along the road in exactly the same way as everyone else. I need to understand that you have some way of getting water that they didn't so that you won't die of starvation along the way. This understanding of why they died and what you're doing different needs to be specific. You have a way of getting a much lower customer acquisition cost, right? Your CAC is a fraction of theirs. Your operating expenses are much lower. You are going after a slightly different market that's much easier to reach. You have a different go-to-market strategy. You have an advantage in go-to-market partners perhaps. You need to be able to articulate that clearly. But remember, not being the only company isn't necessarily a bad thing. Obvious business ideas are obvious. Really good ideas are likely to occur to a lot of people. The key is, do you have an advantage over them? You're not just one of many doing exactly the same thing. You need to be coming at this from a particular perspective with a reason why that's going to win. So the first part of the math was, are you in the right time to be able to grab a lion's share of the market? The next piece is that market big enough to make a viable investment? So the reality is, as an investor, we're thinking of this as a portfolio. We're going to make 20, 30, or more investments over some period of time with the knowledge that many, actually most, won't be successful. Our rule of thumb is that out of 20 investments, 2 will probably be successful, and statistically, with 20, really high probability of at least 1 being successful. The rest of those will return little money, no money, right, go bankrupt entirely. They don't really contribute to the portfolio. So that winner then needs to be generating returns for the entire portfolio. Right? We're going to assume there's only going to be 1. And that's over 10 years. And we could have just taken all our money and put it in an S&P 500 index fund, which would be very safe. So you've got to be generating better returns than that. And again, over a 10-year period. So when you grind the numbers on that, it turns out that you have to be returning something like 20 times our investment at a minimum for this to be a win for the investor. It sounds kind of crazy. It seems like a greedy thing, but if you can't do that, then you really aren't moving the needle, and we're going to lose money compared to just having done something very conservative. So the upshot of that is you typically need to be looking at a 10-year projection of making hundreds of millions of dollars per year for your company, which justifies then a billion to multi-billion dollar valuation, which, round numbers, is what you need to have to be venture investable. If your business model doesn't support that, it might be a fantastic business and might make you personally incredibly wealthy, but it won't work for venture investors. And of course, that valuation happens at exit. And the exit is the time when investors get paid. Typically, we're not looking to get paid from your revenues. We're not looking to get dividends. We're looking to see a huge payout at the end of the day. And that end of the day happens in one of 2 ways. Either you're acquired by a big company, ideally for cash, or you have an IPO. You go on the public markets and now your stock is publicly tradable. Until that time, your stock is generally not tradable. We are, as investors, locked in, as are you, the founder, until that happens. There really isn't any ability to see any gains till then. So we're trusting that that's your target outcome. A lifestyle business that you're planning to run for 10 or 20 years, 30 years, hand on to your children, that's a fantastic generational wealth generator, but it's not a good outcome for an investor. My money is now tied up for 30 years, making meager returns. I need to see that exit. You need to be promising and intending to drive towards an acquisition or an IPO at the maximum possible valuation, ideally as quickly as possible. Right? We're expecting it to take 10 years. We'd love to see it take 5 to 7. Now, of course, IPOs are actually pretty rare. So at the pre-seed level, a lot of angel investors in particular are looking at the acquisition opportunities. So make sure that you've researched, are there companies in your space making substantial sized acquisitions on a regular basis? There's actually a market out there for companies like yours so that when you're ready, the acquisition can happen at an attractive valuation. A few months back, I was running the screening committee at the North Bay Angels, my angel investment group. And we were looking at this one founder, and at the end of his pitch, we were all really impressed. He had it down, the pitch looked good, he sounded good, and we walked away with this real halo around his company and were excited about what he was doing. But then, after we'd seen all the companies, we started to discuss them, and that's when things started to turn. And we immediately began to realize that it was all sizzle, no steak. There was no there at the end of the day. He didn't have a clear go-to-market strategy. It was all pure hand-wavium. He didn't understand the fundamental key performance indicators. He didn't know his CAC. He didn't have a clear sense of what the conversion was going to be from clicks to buys on his website. He didn't know exactly who his customers were. He didn't have proof that they were desperate for the thing he was doing. He had a huge vision and passion, but fundamentally, this was a beautiful wrapping paper on an empty box, and obviously he did not move to actually present to the full group. The next big filter is evidence. We're looking for several kinds of evidence, the first of which is, do you have a pool of potential customers who are actively hungry for the solution that you're building right now? We need to know that this is a priority for them. If you can't find a large number of customers for whom this is their top priority, it's unlikely that you'll be able to scale the business. It can't be a nice to have for them. We see this a lot with founders when they're interviewing potential customers. They say, would this be useful? Would this help you? Would this save you money? And people go, yes, yes, yes. And the founder interprets that as, this is a potential customer, they will buy from me. But customers have thousands of things they could do to improve their business or improve their life. Right? There's endless ways they could spend their money and time. They're really only going to get to the top few of those. If you are not one of those top few, then they're not going to be buying your product. It'll be like, yeah, that's nice. Let me think about that in 10 years, and your company is going to be dead well before that. So I want to know, is this an urgent need for them? And you need to prove it. You need to be running experiments to demonstrate that fact. Not only do they need to desperately need your solution needs to be enough better than their alternatives to get them to take a chance on buying from an early stage startup, right? That's a massive risk. They might spend a huge amount of time migrating onto your platform only for you to disappear in 18 to 24 months, and now they're suddenly stuck with an unsupported product and needing to switch back. So the hurdle for startups is higher than it would be for established companies. You need to be a whole lot better. So the evidence that we're looking for here ideally is sales. If you have a functional product, you've got your MVP out, already being able to sell to customers is the gold standard of traction. If you don't have that, we want to see letters of intent, waiting lists, pre-orders, maybe even unpaid pilots where people are putting in the work to implement it, and we can see people using it, right? Even if they're not paying for the solution, if you've got people who are actively engaging with your prototype or MVP on an ongoing basis, that strongly indicates that they may buy it later. That's the kind of thing we want to see if you don't have the actual cash coming in the door. The next piece of evidence is that you can reach those customers. You know there are people who want what you're building, but can you get to them, tell them about your product, and have them buy from you in a cost-effective way? So reachability, can you find a marketing method which hits them at that right moment, right? If you're trying to sell something to new parents, you can't just market to everyone. The only people who need this are people who are within, say, 6 weeks before or after of the birth of their child. Everything else is irrelevant. Can you hit that sweet spot? If companies are looking for security, when are they making that decision? What are those criteria? They're not looking all the time. Can you hit them at that right moment? Often it's the CTO. Can you even reach that CTO? People are beating on their doors all the time. What are the ways you're going to find the customer that you're looking for? And can you do that at a reasonable customer acquisition cost? If you're using conventional marketing, if you're using ad spend, this is particularly critical. That has to be something that is manageable within the rest of your business model so that your profit margins support it. And in fact, you can pay back your advertising cost of sales in short order. I want to make sure that that's turning around in no more than probably 6 months, so that you can reinvest that money. If it takes you 5 years to recoup what you spent on that, your company is never going to be able to raise enough money to offset the costs that you're eating. That brings up the third line of evidence that we want to see, which is your actual business model and financial models. How does this whole thing work? Do you really understand what your cost of goods are? If you're doing physical manufacturing, how much does it cost to build this thing? If you're providing a service, do you really understand what it takes to run it? For example, if you're built on top of AI models, exactly how do those costs scale? How does that compare to the way in which you are charging customers? What happens if the customers suddenly start using it a lot, but you've got a fixed per seat fee for your income, but you're charged on a usage basis for the suppliers that you're using? That can blow up pretty quickly. So we want to make sure that you've actually run to ground all of the incomes and outgoes, all of your cost centers, your overhead, your staffing needs, your customer support needs, and look at some industry standard numbers for a lot of these data points. It's easy to assume that you'll be able to do this with no people in the office, but historically that's not the way it ever works. Get real about exactly what all of these are and make sure that your entire business model works. Now, we're not expecting you to be profitable on day one. Effectively, no startups are unless they're bootstrapping, but we need to know that at some point you can get there. When you're at scale, when you've got some economies of scale running, the economics need to be able to work. You need to have that data now showing in the future it'll function. The next filter is looking at your moat. So you've got a business that you can build, you can bring in customers, they want what you're selling, and the economics work well. The next question is, can you hold that market when the competitors see that? When a 500-pound gorilla spots this opportunity that you've now shown everyone in the world exists, why can't they roll in with a truckload of money and a building full of engineers, copy what you've done, and crush you like a bug? They can afford to lose more money than you can for quite a while. So there needs to be some very specific structural things that allow you to protect your space. First mover is rarely that advantage, and I see people claim that all the time. Well, we're first to market, we're going to win because we were there first, we'll build the brand name. But in many cases, the first to market is just the person identifying and clearing the landmines, maybe losing a couple of limbs along the way, and fundamentally, it's just a small head start in a race where your competitor probably has a faster car. Switching costs can be a kind of moat. It doesn't necessarily prevent your competitors from entering the space, but it can help you defend the customers that you've already acquired. So if you've got a first mover advantage and high switching costs, you can then continue to try to grow your space while holding on to all the people that you've already got. It's not as compelling as real moats, but it can be a piece of the puzzle. Ideally, you want to be tightly integrated with your customer, so they're seeing a lot of value from that integration. You're woven into their workflows and their processes. Their data is sitting on your platform so that it's a huge pain in the ass to leave. Right? The bigger the pain of leaving, the more likely they are to stay in place. Now, one catch to this is that if customers see that there's huge switching costs, they may hesitate to buy from a startup because the startup may disappear and they're going to have to eat those switching costs. So it's a bit of a balance. You're going to need to talk to customers to understand exactly where their heads are at around that. If you have a data flywheel, that can be pretty powerful. This is a situation where the longer a customer is on your platform and living within your ecosystem, the better able you are to support them. You're building better AI models. You've got richer history and data about their activities, about their customers. The entire solution improves with time, which inherently means that if they switch, they're hitting the reset button on all of that. And the new provider would be starting from scratch to provide that level of service. So as long as you're providing high quality and that quality and value is going up over time, they're very unlikely to leave your business. There are a few much harder edged moats that you can build. The first of those is intellectual property protection, patents primarily. If you have a patentable technology underlying your business, you now have a way of legally excluding other businesses from entering. Now, enforcing that can be challenging, but with a strong enough patent, you can probably, if a big player tries to invade your space, at least get some other player to acquire you at a reasonable price to sue them out of existence, because then they have that cornered market and they're able to exploit it in a way that you probably couldn't. But just having a patent doesn't cut it. Patents need to be strong. They need to cover a substantial amount of intellectual property so that other people can't just engineer around it. Right? I can't paint the thing red instead of blue and now I've avoided your patent. Right? You might be 5% more efficient than me because I have to do things in a slightly different way. But if that 5% is not particularly material to the value of the solution, then it isn't that defensible. But if you do have a strong patent, that can be a big moat that you can declare in your deck. Another way of doing this is with trade secrets. So if there's something about the solution that you're creating which was very hard to learn, right? You're coming out of a university or a lab kind of environment. You've spent a lot of time and experience creating this solution, or there's an enormous amount of know-how to doing it, that it just isn't obvious. People can't look at your solution and immediately intuit, I would know how to solve that problem. Really good trade secrets can be a strong moat. Obviously, you can't talk about it in your pitch deck because it's a secret, but later on you can have NDAs and talk about it, but you can refer to that to say, we have this kind of understanding without going into the details in your deck to let people know you do have a way of defending your space. And finally, there's cornered resources. Do you have some ability to keep other people from being able to provide your solution? A classic example might be you have exclusive use of the local gravel mine, and so anyone who wants to make concrete has to buy gravel from you, and there really isn't an opportunity to open another gravel pit nearby. You might have an exclusive relationship with a dominant player in a space as their exclusive provider of the subservice that you provide. No one else is going to be able to do that with them, and really doing it without being partnered with them is putting them at a huge disadvantage. You might have a go-to-market partner that's allowing you to access their enormous customer base, and only you get to access them. So anytime you can contractually or physically exclude other people from being able to play in the space, that also provides a strong moat. And really get real on this. I see a lot of wishful thinking around moats when people are saying why people won't be able to get in and compete with them. You need to be really hard-nosed and give it a tough look. This is hard truth time. Be realistic about whether this would stop someone else from getting into the space and how long it would stop them from getting in. Right? A moat that delays people by 6 months probably doesn't matter unless you're also able to, say, bring in massive network effects within that 6 months. And network effects is a classic moat, but you need to typically be pretty big before you can take advantage of it. Same with economies of scale. Make sure that it's realistic for you to achieve those. You want to know that both for the investor's benefit, but also for your own. Don't lie to yourself about the company you're building. The fourth big filter that investors look at is the machine. Are you building a machine that can systematically take your startup from idea to billion-dollar unicorn? And the first element of that is your team. Do you have the right people in place? And this is super important to investors because we know there's a very high probability that you will pivot. You're not going to end up building the exact same thing you're planning to build now as soon as you start talking to customers, right? No plan survives first contact with the enemy. The team is the group that will execute whatever direction you end up going. I need to know you have the right people on the bus. They've got to have all of the skills necessary to execute on this. If you're a solopreneur, you need to have a team of advisors, hired people, contractors. You need to be able to check all of the key boxes, and the critical functions need to be inside the company. If you don't have the critical function, you need to be finding a co-founder. If you're missing those big gaps, that's just a huge no-no for investors. Investors are going to look really hard at why. Are you the right team for this? What experience, history, knowledge, skill sets do you have to bring to bear that will allow you to be successful at this? And indeed, more successful than another random team that someone might assemble to try to achieve the same goals. This is often called founder market fit. Are you the right people to go after this particular problem with the kind of approach that you're taking? If your advantage is all about marketing, you need to have really skilled marketing people. If it's all about building community, do you have people who know community? If it's about deep tech and AI, do you have experienced deep tech AI people? Right? You need to have the key skills that matter. Probably isn't accounting unless you're doing something in fintech, in which case it's fine that you're outsourcing the accounting. But if you're doing something that's really sophisticated metallurgy and you don't have a metallurgist on your team, that's not a good start. That doesn't mean that every member of your team needs to be able to do all of these things. This is a collective understanding. The people who are going to be fully involved in your company, ideally all full-time once you get funding, need to, across the board, encompass all of those needs. And some of you, at least, need to have at least enough of an understanding of your space to have a unique insight into what you're doing. I've touched on this before, but this is really about the team knowing enough about this market to understand why the other competitors are missing something important. Why are they falling down? What about how to get customers or how to provide the solution, how to cut costs? Some fundamental aspect of the business that other smart competitors are missing that you're going to be able to execute on, or maybe even something structural that the big incumbents cannot take advantage of the thing you're going to do for reasons X, Y, and Z. That's the kind of insight we want to have from the members of your team. That's the kind of experience that we're looking for. And then I want to know, can you or have you actually built a solution like this? Do you have the know-how to do it? Especially with things like hardware companies, people will have a really cool idea, they'll be able to design a pretty product, they know how to do the back-end software, but if they've never actually been involved in manufacturing something, I have real doubt about their ability to bring this to market at scale. It's very different to build one prototype on a desktop that kind of works versus building 100,000 of them in a factory in Taiwan that are going to be able to be sold at an attractive price and have low return rates and high customer quality and survive environmental factors and everything else. So we want to understand, are there any technical unknowns to your solution? What are the hurdles you're going to need to cross before you release it? Some companies fundamentally don't have them. If you're just building a marketplace, your problems are not technical. They're more about how do you build up both sides of the marketplace in a balanced way very quickly so that the network effects start to happen. Whatever those unknowns are, though, you need to be testing them. How many of those can you eliminate? Because every single unknown that an investor sees is a huge strike against your startup. It's not that you can't even possibly eliminate all possible unknowns, but we certainly don't want you to fail for foreseeable reasons. So using prototypes, countertop experiments, small-scale solutions, whatever it takes to guarantee that you have these things lined up, even including having already negotiated contracts or in theory contracts with manufacturers so you understand exactly what your costs will be. Whatever you can do to knock down those unknowns is great. We have no interest in funding science experiments. Science experiments are funded with grants. Go get a SBIR grant. We want to fund growth. We have to know that you will be able to get this up and running reliably and fairly quickly. Once you've got all 4 of those filters checked off, you know you can pass all of them with flying colors. Building your deck is really easy. Now you just need to explain all of those things to the investors. Now there is still an art and science to that, making sure that in the short amount of time that all comes through to them, that they understand that you are correctly answering all of those questions. You do have all that data. You do pass all of those hurdles, because it's easy to let that fall through the cracks. But fundamentally, you've got the reality there. When they start digging in, when they ask questions, when they start pulling on threads, everything's going to be solid. It vastly improves your chances of successfully raising capital. So in short, don't start pitching until you're ready. Start building proof and validation as early as you possibly can, not just for investors, but also for yourself, so you're not wasting time running down dead alleys. Do that with experiments. Quick, cheap, dirty experiments to get the numbers that you need to prove out all of your assumptions. Don't need 5 significant figures. These only need to be quick answers to say, yes, this works, no, this doesn't work, and move on. What you need to have is a structured process and discipline for fundraising, not just trusting to luck. So if you want to see how you measure up against these filters, get my fundraising readiness checklist. It's the same list that I use when I'm evaluating companies applying to the North Bay Angels. You can get it and all the other fundraising tools at feeltheboot.com/raise. If you find this kind of content useful, please like, subscribe, and ring the bell. It tells the algorithm that this is the kind of content you want to see more of and really helps the channel. I appreciate it. Before you actually start building your pitch deck, check out this video here. It's on the 6 different decks that you need to have when you're pitching investors. One is not going to cut it. And until next time, ciao.